Welcome to the SSI Orbit podcast, a forum where we explore the ever-growing ecosystems of self-sovereign identity. And I'm your host, Mathieu Glaude. In this episode of SSI Orbit, I talk with Stepan Gershuni, lead product manager at Affinity, founder of Credentia, and also as a hobby, runs the Cryptoeconomics research group. Now, during this conversation, we discuss the history and the business models of each evolution of the internet, from Web 1 to Web 2 to Web 3.0. We discuss the different ways for SSI to gain adoption. We talk about how economic inefficiencies can be used to create business use cases and propel the adoption of SSI as a better way of doing things. We talk about how we could use SSI to create completely new paradigms that are unimaginable today. We also discuss how cryptoeconomics could be used to increase the value of a verifiable credential within a decentralized ecosystem. We talk about much more as well, but without further ado, here's my conversation with Stepan, which I enjoyed very much. And we're on. Stepan, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
I've been very much looking forward to this conversation. I think the times we've spoken before have been quite interesting. We come both from the crypto space. We've moved to the SSI space. We share similar visions for the decentralized future and the decentralized tech stack. So I was very much looking forward to this conversation on the podcast today, that we could kind of maybe geek out a little bit or push ourselves more into the future. I think these are fun conversations to have. And then at the same time, I'm hoping we could also just focus on stuff around just go to market and just near-term things that we think are interesting with SSI, just to keep pushing the adoption forward. So I guess where I wanted to start here is we hear a lot about Web 3.0, and it's kind of this space or the umbrella that we fall into. How do you look at the evolution of Web 1.0 through 2.0 to 3.0? And my thinking is we are still in Web 2. Web 2, we've come to realize has resulted in a lot of centralization and censorship and stuff like that. Is Web 3 kind of taking back the ethos of Web 1? How do you look at
that? So first of all, thanks a lot for inviting me. Actually, I did listen to some of the previous episodes, and I really enjoy the podcast, and some of the guests are just great. I think my opinion, so Web3 is just one of the terms, and it might not be the one that we eventually settle with, because previously there were a few things that were called Web3, and none of them actually became Web3. I think Ethereum library, like JavaScript library that is called Web3 is what is giving this name today. So some people call this, I've heard about this metaverse thesis, there's decentralized web, different names, but the same thing. I think it's not replacement. I think it's all evolution. So Web 1.1 was just amazing invention, which took if you start from the if you look at the initial ARPANET to what then became World Wide Web, it took a lot of great minds and a lot of time to develop. Then Web 2 was the best way to scale it, because you cannot go from a few thousand people online to 3.5 billion, and in the same time make sure that it's all privacy preserving and decentralized and fully compliant with all the ethical and technical requirements. And I think Web3 is just a next layer up the spiral. For me, it's more about fixing. It's all about taking what work well, and then fixing the things that were created through this natural evolution. I think the reason Web 2 exists as it is today, it's not some deliberate decision. It's more about economic trends. So companies who were created in the 90s or later, Facebook, Twitter, Google, they had to find some business model. And because, especially in early 90s, there was no way to do payments online, that naturally led to advertisement-based business model. And therefore, if you're doing advertisement, it's all about collecting data and make just basically companies compete in terms of who has better targeting and more audience. So they need to lock people in, and they need to collect as much data to provide better service to their advertisers. And generally, I think most of the users are fine with this. So it's not like Google is forcing anyone to use their service, or it's not like Facebook not letting you to not use it if you don't want to share any data, or if you don't want to that data to be collected. But the same kind of service. So the good thing about Facebook, it provides ability to communicate with your friends and the whole world. That is the positive thing, and it should be definitely should exist in Web3 and in different services. But then you can do the same and actually provide the companies who build this ability to make money, ability to have a business model, but with the new technology, it can be done, I guess, more correctly, more taking into account user preferences and different risks that there exist. So when we're speaking just a few days ago, Facebook was hacked, or I don't actually know what happened, but somehow they lost 500 million personal data on 500 million users, which is definitely not a good sign. And well, SSI, in SSI world, this wouldn't happen. So there's a lot of economical and ethical and regulatory trends that force internet companies to start thinking about decentralization to provide the same or better level of customer experience while giving users more autonomy or sovereignty.
Yeah, I think obviously a lot of the companies that spun up and built business models on top of, let's just call it Web 2.0, like are amazing, right? And you alluded to that. It's like with Facebook, you could connect to literally anyone in the world. It's phenomenal. Amazon services, it's just like it's ridiculous to think that you could order anything you want for so cheap, and the next day it's on your doorstep. It's like it's magic, right? And so for these companies that are kind of a lot of them are built on just advertising models, like you had explained. There were no payments and stuff. That just became kind of the model. It became a data mining model and selling that for advertisements. For these companies that today have business models built on top of all these Web 2.0 methods, what's the transition for them to Web 3.0? And we could talk a bit more about the business models of Web 3.0. I think we're definitely seeing, like, the Twitter is a good example of this. Like, I think that Twitter realizes where the world is going. I think it's quite clear that their CEO is a big advocate of decentralization. Is it just replacing the plumbing, building new protocols under? Like, how does a company think about transitioning, in your point of view, from Web 2 to Web 3?
Yeah, I think the common trend is that great companies like Amazon or Twitter or Apple or Google, they do think about their customers first. So, for example, if we think about who can be one of the largest competitors for some of the SSI products, I think Apple comes to mind. It is because not because it's decentralized. Apple has did not release any blockchain-based product or any decentralized product. But at some point, a few years ago, they realized that being privacy conscious and advertising that is just important for their users, and they mention it at any convenient way. So most of Apple products, you always have these privacy settings. They always highlight it. They always show that how they care, and they can do it because their business model does not depend on advertisement at all. So they have App Store, they have hardware, and you actually. There's probably some value for Apple to get more insights about their customer behavior, but it's not their core business model. In terms of transitioning, I think I think there's maybe two different school of thoughts. So one is that there will be new decentralized Facebook, decentralized YouTube, decentralized Twitter, and they will just replace existing companies. And in some verticals, that is definitely the case. However, still most IT companies are not they are not like Blockbuster when faced with Netflix. They're not discarding this technology, and they actually, I think some people at Google, at Twitter, well, especially at Twitter and at all those large corporations, they do understand decentralized technology quite well. They understand blockchain. They just maybe not. I don't know what they're thinking, but maybe they feel like it's too early. And also, Facebook tried to launch Libra, and if you're large, you are faced with this regulatory pushback. So it's not as easy to launch decentralized product. But still it is important from product standpoint. So for example, what Jack Dorsey mentioned is that so there's a lot of scandals and discussion around should social media be blocking or banning some of their users? Is it ethical? Should they comply with government regulation? In some countries, governments are actually forcing social media to ban people who just don't like the political situation. In other situations, it's companies themselves deciding that something is inappropriate, even if it's not purely illegal. So, and the reason for that is, I think, is not that companies are taking too much, that those companies taking too much initiative. It's because there's no good framework. Because government, or most of the governments, cannot provide feedback because governments don't understand internet as good as those companies. And decentralized technology can be a solution because it creates a flexible system where all opinions can be present. And then, so for example, for social media, you can have a layer with decentralized identifiers and people just posting their tweets as verifiable credentials. And then you can have multiple UIs that are connected to the same underlying protocol. So the protocol with the data is decentralized and it's completely permissionless, but then you can build a kids-friendly Twitter on top of that filters out any content that is not good for kids. So that is kind of self, and this I think very similar to how internet looked in the beginning. I think initially the transition would happen in those areas where this is a real problem for the customers, because it's you don't want to risk business just to try something. On the other hand, there's a lot of experiments and the whole crypto space, which is just one big experiment. I think for me, it's still like the fact that Bitcoin works and like every 10 minutes you get a new block. It's still like a miracle.
I'm with you on that one. I think there's a lot to unpack in what you said there. The Apple privacy positioning is quite evident and is a very good indicator that I've always thought that kind of the biggest feature of the 2020s is going to be privacy, and I think Apple is really kind of driving that forward in their marketing, but they're also making things happen in the product where they're trying to be transparent. They're trying to give control to people that are using the products, and they posted billboards across big cities about it. I remember a massive one in Toronto, where we are. So and I do find it interesting, the kind of it's either you just replace, and I think in the crypto space there's a lot of projects that they're kind of just, they're like, yeah, the existing world is wrong, we're just going to rebuild. But then on the other side, it's kind of like, that's maybe not the best way to adoption either, when there's already network effects, there's already, and, and by the way, like, there's so many benefits and so much value that these companies are providing today. They have the distribution, they have the scale, they have the client base. And so if privacy is inherently important to them, and kind of moving towards a more decentralized model is important to them, I think that there's steps that they could take. The Twitter one is interesting to me. I think this whole cancel culture, I guess, as you described, it's political at the end of the day, right? Like you could think one thing or another thing about just the president of the United States being removed from social media platforms. You could think one thing or another about an app like Parler just being removed, for the server's not running it anymore. But it then comes down to, if you want to kind of move that forward, and you really want to look into some of these, call them issues, like the cancel culture and all these things that are happening, there's something interesting about pseudonymous identities online, right? And I'm interested kind of what your thoughts are on pseudonymous. Like SSI enables that to some extent, right? Like SSI, or having trusted digital credentials, enables you to conduct business transactions or to access products and services according to kind of their rules or their terms and their conditions. So you could prove that, but your identity as Stepan or as Mathieu, we don't necessarily need to have that attributes that like, that seems like our names that we're given, like our legal names, are attributes that potentially are outdated for the Web 3.0. That there's a lot of risk associated with that, right? And the fact that our online lives are attributed to our names, or these attributes, then when you see a hack like the Facebook hack happen, it's not great, right? Or when browsing or chat histories get put out, it's going to cause a lot of issues for people. So is that something you think about, of kind of being able to use credentials? You're still able to be compliant, you're able to conduct business transactions and follow terms and conditions, but like, you could be pseudonymous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, I want to unpack this a little bit. I think, so I do agree that decentralized web is not happening just because it's decentralized. It has to solve some problem, it has to bring some value. And from like very, very high level, I think there's two kind of clusters of reasons why these technologies are getting traction. And first one, which is, we can call it like boring SSI, but actually it's not boring, it's just very clear economic benefit. So the first part of the first bucket of why decentralized technologies are getting adoption is because they're really solving some pricing problem today. So for example, you have a paper-based credentials or documents or attestations, and then you replace those with digital ones, and they're also decentralized. They're also can be exchanged in peer-to-peer manner. So a lot of companies don't have to be integrated into a single database, so it's cheaper to maintain. So those are purely economic benefits. Basically, what happens is moving a trusted data exchange system onto verifiable credentials or SSI rails reduces the transaction costs. And those transaction costs are present in any economic activities. So blockchain does the same. If you want to have a maybe reduce costs, legal costs, you can use smart contract because it's automatically enforced. And well, if you imagine if it works and it's really the product is out there, or you can use some kind of blockchain to reduce maybe supply chain management costs, or in verifiable credentials. This is clear. So a lot of, actually most of the applications of verifiable credentials today, they are really focused on this transaction cost reduction, and that can be huge. So that can be tens of times reduction, because you not only make it cheaper, but you also make it more or less prone to fraud, because you can fake paper certificates or paper document. It's much harder with digital signature. You reduce the single point of failure because there's no database. You increase privacy. You get automatical compliance. So if you build an SSI system, it's kind of GDPR or CCPA compliant from day one, because there's no centralized company who's storing everything. It's just issuers and holders, and they have right to do it. And I think the same can be said about every layer of the decentralized stack. So this works for decentralized storage, verifiable credentials, blockchain, cryptocurrencies, and so on. And then there's a second bucket, which is more future looking, but it's still not about just the idea that we will have a new world, which is just better. It has to be about creating a new paradigm of trust or new paradigm of interaction. So before internet, it was not possible to have anonymous communication at all. With the internet, we now have anonymous communication. We have all the problems associated with that, because we have scam, we have fraud, we have people pretending to be other people, we have people getting angry, or so all these problems. And then we can apply decentralized technology to that, so we can have pseudonyms on the internet that are not revealing your real world identity, yet you can prove something about yourself. So for example, I was recently reading the Gitcoin grants blog. Actually, it was Vitalik Buterin blog, and he wrote about the recent Gitcoin program. And they have, so Gitcoin is a system that just companies come together. They have a fund that is used to fund some public goods, how they call it. So those are some educational programs or some open source development that is for benefits the whole industry. And the problem that they now start having is that because everything is anonymized, people just use their cryptocurrency wallets, basically the IDs, to identify themselves. They now start seeing Sybil attacks, so one person pretending multiple users. And SSI can solve this problem, because you can have a completely anonymous DID, but yet you can have a bunch of verifiable credentials attached to it that prove your personhood, or prove that you have a I don't know, a social media account, or you have a phone number, or you have a you met someone in person without revealing your name. Or actually, this can go even further. You can have the whole professional identity, so you can be like anonymous developer, someone like Satoshi, and yet you can prove that here's your cryptocurrency wallet, and you have money, or you received money from someone. You can prove that you contributed to this code base. You can prove that you have this skill or competency, or you participated in some public work. So now you can be anonymous, and this system can be as efficient as a not anonymous one. So this is to kind of sum it up. The first bucket is about finding economic inefficiencies or customer problems in the world today, in government, in public sector, in enterprises, in different economic interactions. For example, for SSI, it's usually establishing trust. How do I trust that this parking ticket is valid, or is issued by the right person? Or how do I know that this diploma issued in another country is actually can be accepted here in my country? So we can use SSI and solve those problems, because those things can be solved today. It just takes time. I need to call to the university. I need to get a apostille. I need to spend a lot of money. I actually went recently through this problem of notarizing my diploma. So I have diploma from United States, and I had to present it to German authorities, and it cost me like 500 euros in total for shipment and notarization and all different costs. So with SSI, this can be done in maybe it should cost like $1. And then there's the second part, which is just thinking about new paradigm of trust or new paradigm of social interaction that can be enabled through decentralized technologies. Now we can have decentralized money that is uncensorable. We can have decentralized storage, which is not at least controlled by Amazon. It can be still based on some kind of Amazon infrastructure, but it's encrypted and it's distributed. So I can have my data in a decentralized accessible way. I can have my personal identity, which is anonymous, at least if I want. I can maybe generate a zero knowledge proof or just not disclose some of the parameters, some of the attributes. And I can even have the programmatic governance through decentralized autonomous organizations. So I can have actually a complete business built in this new paradigm. But from go-to-market standpoint, realistically, I think it's still mostly the first part, which is a real present market with real problems, and it is huge. Because if we take just world GDP and we calculate what percentage of it are transaction costs associated with establishing trust, that is, in my opinion, trillions of dollars. So there's a lot of work to do there. And then we have this new market, which is completely blue ocean, and it's even hard to predict how big it can be.
Yeah, it's the new paradigm stuff is super interesting, and it's just stuff that I always felt like it's stuff that hasn't been figured out yet. Obviously, it's stuff that until you build and do more experiments and stuff, you start seeing what is newly possible. And the nice comparison to that is just with the rise of the internet, people trying to put faxes over the internet type of thing, right? It's just you don't want to redo things the same way. You could do something completely different. So I agree with that. And just, I guess, stepping back and just looking at kind of the first bucket you illustrated, where you're able to solve problems today with economic inefficiencies. I think that's when I got into the crypto, blockchain, decentralized tech, call it what you want, space. A lot of the projects or that we saw or we worked on or stuff like that was we were trying to use a blockchain or distributed ledger to solve some of these economic inefficiencies. So, but a supply chain, you've mentioned supply chains, like, yeah, how could you use a supply chain to lower the costs throughout the supply chain, create more transparency or traceability in the supply chain as well? There were a bunch of benefits to that we were going after. It was interesting because there was this whole, and since the start of crypto, there's kind of been this on and off trend of people being excited about about public blockchains, public crypto, and then every now and then there's all this excitement about these permissioned or quote enterprise suited systems, right? And a lot of these quote enterprise suited blockchain systems haven't really taken off as people would have liked to see them take off. And we don't have to name any specific projects. We all kind of know them. One of the things, like being deep inside of that world, was always, if you're trying to achieve some of the properties that you get from decentralized technology, like verifiability or immutability or traceability, there's different elements to the decentralized stack that need to be deployed. It's not kind of one solution fits all. And what we saw is people are just trying to throw everything on a blockchain just because, right? And it's just like, it kind of didn't really make sense. So we always felt like there was a big missing piece, which had to do with credentialing and identity, right? So it's like you want to build a system to achieve some benefits. You're making a decision to use, just call it private blockchain or consortium environment because, I don't know, I need performance, or I need privacy, or whatever the reasons are for those, right? I think that the big piece that we noticed that was missing is this SSI piece, right? It's the credentialing piece to it. And another piece that was missing, we felt, from the enterprise blockchain space, and is a space that you know quite well, and I know you spend a lot of time on this stuff, is the cryptoeconomics. What's the point of creating a consortium when there's no incentive for people to run these things? And that's where you see a lot of projects just die. So I think it's clear that the verifiable credentials and just the SSI stack, let's call it, fits in nicely to this model with these projects. It fits nicely into public blockchains as well, if you're using it for specific purposes. But how do you view cryptoeconomics fit into this whole thing? How does it play with SSI?
Yeah, so maybe let me address the first part first. I think, in my personal opinion, I'm not a huge fan of permission blockchains. I think that idea was proven not to not work even economically quite fast. But the reason there were still a lot of companies that kept trying was the ICO boom. So it kind of, I think one overlapped, because there was a lot of excitement about enterprise blockchain. Then people realized that if several companies, so first of all, they can have a database, a centralized database with cryptographically signed data. They don't need blocks. They don't need this solution for double spend or Byzantine problem solution. They just need a way to track authenticated data, and you can do it in Postgres or MySQL. But then, because kind of blockchain was a new technology, not everybody quite understood what it is. And then there was Bitcoin was growing, and a lot of ICOs popped up. I think that was a positive feedback loop. So people were trying. I really had a few projects that were trying to put coal mines or gold mines or oil drilling on the blockchain. And that was kind of permission blockchain, but they had tokens, and they were trying to sell those tokens. So I think it doesn't make sense. I think the problem that enterprises are trying to solve is really addressed best by SSI stack, and actually might be, especially today, I don't think that cryptoeconomic incentives is necessary. I think it's more of governance system that is missing. So I think the some of the key areas of innovation for SSI today are actually creating better governance mechanisms that are not economically incentivized, but they just compliant, and they're transparent, and ideally they're at least somehow connected to government framework. So, for example, European Union self-sovereign identity framework or things like that. It's a good way for enterprises to start using these systems, because it's not like blockchain. You have your data off chain, so it's not like your competitors can access all your customers' data. So that's good. But things what trust over IP is doing, and in general the governance approach. So how do I trust issuers or verifiers, and in the same time do it in a way that is recognizable by the government or by the legal system? I think it's important for wider adoption. The cryptoeconomics part, that one is necessary when you actually don't have enterprises, because so, and the reason for that is that you can have a superior again economic efficiency through removing intermediaries. So you need cryptoeconomics basically to replace intermediaries that are enforcing trust in the system. And one example, or maybe I can build on the example of professional identity. You can have a centralized university that you pay $100,000, you get your degree and you get your diploma. It might be a verifiable credential, but at the same time, you can actually go to YouTube, watch the same lectures like Stanford or Harvard. They have great YouTube channels. You can go and practice, I don't know, do a coding project on GitHub, or just meet with someone. So internet allows access to education, and it's virtually free in a lot of cases. But you don't get that degree, that official diploma. And we can think of a system that is actually decentralized, that can award you with the recognizable educational credentials. So for example, if you are a software engineer, you taught yourself, you did a bunch of projects, then you go on this website, or it's a smart contract, you have someone who is a verifier who just checks your knowledge, and they run a pair programming session with you and award you with a degree of software engineer level 3 in I don't know, TypeScript or something. And in order to protect the system, because the system is prone to fraud, you can basically collude or bribe that person. We can use cryptoeconomic mechanisms. So something like Augur is doing for prediction market, we can have a staking mechanism. So as a verifier, you have a stake of, let's say, $1,000. You assess different people who come to you, and then this assessment is public. And if someone can find that you assessed someone incorrectly, or they have they think that there was a collusion, they can open up a dispute. And if this dispute passes, you are getting slashed for some portion of your deposit. Obviously, this is just a very, very bare idea. It has to be tested. It has to be evaluated in real world, because cryptoeconomics is hard. Algorithmic economical mechanism are it's more of experimentation and iteration than just creating great initial idea. But this shows that you can actually have some type of credential that is received through decentralized mechanism. Therefore, you don't have that intermediary who awards that credential, and in the end, it's just cheaper. So you can get the same degree or the same credential as computer science bachelor diploma, but instead of spending $100,000, you spend maybe $100 for that assessment.
For a lot of, I guess, like the new, if you talk about working talent as an example, like I totally agree with you. It's just if you have the motivation and the curiosity to learn, if you have access to a computer or to the internet, you could pick up anything, right? And so it definitely potentially lowers the value of could lower the value of a university degree, because you could look at this like, well, why am I spending tens of thousands of dollars every year to get this degree? And when I do get the degree, it proves that you could read, you could write, you could do certain things, but it doesn't really prove your skills at that point, right? Where with the internet and access to so many different tools, you could think of an even better like micro transaction driven skills model, where you could get credentials for smaller things that actually showcases your skill set and suitability for a job, for example, better than if you're just coming at it with a degree, where it's just, okay, it's cool that you have a degree, but are you actually able to add value to what I'm trying to do?
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess like the cryptoeconomics, it fits more inside of, if I'm understanding kind of where you're going at here. Back to one of your comments earlier, there's two approaches. One is kind of the existing institutions or organizations could innovate and continue to drive down costs and solve economic inefficiencies and stuff like that. But in your second model, this future kind of facing new paradigm model, this is where something like cryptoeconomics is interesting, because you could think of a proper incentive mechanism being put in place will inherently increase the value of a credential that will come out of an ecosystem.
Maybe to put it in a different format, we can think of different business models. So you can get the same end result or the same service by different business models. So first, it is pipeline business model, when you have just a supplier that fits to producer, and you have this chain or production chain, and at each step you have some portion of transaction costs that are covering the trust problem and just connecting those different companies. And in that business model, so that something like manufacturing is usually a pipeline business model, and you solve this through just economies of scale. So you build a larger factory, and you have a vertical integration, and it works. Then, especially online, what's happening more and more, we see platform business models, and that's when platform is not actually producing the product or the service. It's just acting as facilitator. It connects producers with sellers, with buyers, and the value creation is happening outside the platform. And then if we continue this trend, and the platform business model, it's more efficient because you have direct relationship between buyer and the seller, and platform just takes a small cut on each transaction because they provide some kind of guarantee that those sellers are actually, I don't know, Uber drivers that they can drive, or they have license and so on. And then if we continue this model, the next step would be decentralized business model. And in that business model, it acts the same. It's also peer-to-peer connection, but the platform is not existent anymore. So instead of platform, we have decentralized service. And what it does economically is that fee that Uber or App Store was taking is just reduced to the really marginal cost of providing, of basically running that smart contract. If it's a smart contract that connects drivers with, so let's imagine decentralized Uber, and it might not make sense for Uber or so for example, you wouldn't build a decentralized steel mill. It wouldn't work, or it wouldn't be more efficient than the traditional one. For Uber, it might not be the best example because of a lot of regulation, and it's still like real world business, but it makes sense for anything that is done purely online. But maybe for an Uber, an example would be that drivers have their own DIDs, and they have verifiable credentials that prove that they have a car, its technical status, that it's operational, working fine, their driving license, their criminal history, KYC, and so on. And then you have just some kind of, it could be a smart contract, it could be on-chain, it could be a purely SSI system, which is working off-chain. And then you have multiple user interfaces, just apps that allow you as a passenger to find the driver. And in that system, the marginal cost of each ride, instead of Uber fixed fee of, I don't know how many, like 30%, or how much they charge, it can be reduced to, let's say, half of that, because you only need to basically fund the gas for that smart contract, if we put it simply, if it's an open source thing, and maybe a UI, just an app that provides a user interface that might take a small cut, but it's definitely much lower than Uber because it's much more competitive market, because the protocol, the underlying data is public, and anyone can build an app that uses the same underlying data. So that's, I think, just another way to look at these cryptoeconomic mechanisms in terms of how do they enable either better service or the same kind of service, but at lower price through this change of the business model, through this intermediation, basically.
Super interesting. I'm quite a fan of the just being able to properly understand the pipe versus platform business models and the differentiations in that when you're starting a business or even looking at your own business. And I love some of the writing that Sam Smith has done on kind of the platform business models as well. And it's all about reducing transaction costs, but then just how that leads into more of a network effect, and you're reducing trust costs, and you're able to leverage each other's networks and stuff like that. So although that again, I think for both of us is what's super exciting, and what we're trying to build the foundation to strive towards that. We are seeing some interesting activity happening I think it's clear to say there's a lot of momentum in the SSI space. There's a lot of activity happening. There's more money going into it. Just this week, there was an announcement from Microsoft, I think, that they're going to be leveraging ID proofing companies' technologies to then issue a verifiable credential inside of their authenticator app, if I think that's correct, right? And then you could use that, and there are clearly efficiencies in that too. How do you look at the space? Like, that's an example of what's happening right now. Like, what's your view on the space right now? What's exciting? Like, I know there's tons of projects that you're familiar with, whether it's the U.S. Department of Homeland Security or stuff that's happened through MIT, or the Canadian government is doing interesting stuff. What's your view on kind of that space right now? And then I'll add a second question on top of that is, who absorbs the cost for these ecosystem solutions as well is kind of a big theme. We could go one at a time here too, but this is another kind of thought of, if you are developing these ecosystem solutions, if it's government or private sector or stuff like that, who's benefiting from this? Who absorbs the costs? Would love to hear your thinking around that.
Yeah, so I do agree that the momentum is picking up. I was following or was involved in SSI industrial market for about 3 years at this point, and I think the growth that is happening in the last really 3 months or 6 months is accelerating. So pandemic was definitely a catalyst for some of those changes. Actually, one of the projects or one of the products that we developed, it's called Safe Travel, and it's something that a lot of companies are doing, but I think we have quite good momentum in that. It allows people to travel internationally with digital credentials, and the main customers for those are actually immigration authorities and airline companies, because they are the one who, first of all, they demand people to have their vaccination records and pre-departure tests, and they are the one who are losing money or kind of creating the public health problems if people are coming with the fraudulent documents. And also, it's an operational problem, because for airline company, it might take a few minutes to verify a paper-based document. So especially if it's in a foreign language or from some laboratory that you don't even sure that you're not even sure that it exists. So verifiable credentials are solving here a lot, and I think more and more countries over the course of this and next year will be demanding digital healthcare documents for international travel. And if we look at stats, for example, in 2019, there was 1.5 billion people traveling internationally, and a lot of them were doing this multiple times a year. That means that most of those people in a couple of years will be users and customers of verifiable credentials product or SSI products, and that is a huge adoption. So that's much faster. That can happen much faster than some of the blockchain technologies, because cryptocurrency it's probably more popular today, but it won't be growing as fast, because you like if you're fine with banks and if your bank and your Visa card and your mobile fintech app works fine for you, you don't really need Bitcoin if you're not an investor, if you don't want to risk too much. For SSI, it's like it can actually really fast grow to every aspect of the life. So every time you open a bank account, you'll be giving a KYC document in the form of verifiable credential. Every time you applying for a job, you will have some kind of resume or previous working history or your education in the form of verifiable credentials. You can have pretty much any kind of government documents, from, as I mentioned, from parking tickets to business licenses to customs documents, healthcare. So a lot of applications, like we can spend a full hour discussing those. So the potential is there, and it's I think things like the desire and the need to open up international travel, but in the same time in doing that safely, is just one of the catalysts, and I think quite important catalysts to spark this growth. So it was organically happening, and I remember the last IAW Internet Identity Workshop, people were talking about use cases, like we need more use cases. Like everybody talks about technology, and technology is not as hard. It's much harder to get the business model right and to get adoption. And I think we now see much better solutions to that problem. And but it's still obviously early stages. And to address your second point about the costs, I think, well, in my opinion, it depends. But usually it's the verifier who's benefiting the most. So they are the one who's paying for the system, but not always. So you can think of the SSI system as a closed one, where you have a platform or an application, you have issuers, holders, verifiers, and in that case, usually it's verifier who's paying, but not always. But I think it's like they are getting the most value out of the system in most cases, because it's optimization and increasing transparency for their business process. But the second option is to have a network approach, where it's not necessarily one of those three who's paying for the system, but it's rather a network, and the network of networks of different verifiable credentials. And that is, we have a few discussions we were having a few discussions on this topic at DIF. So we started this group called VC Marketplace. And the idea is, how can we design a system that allow different issuers and verifiers who are not familiar with each other to participate in the same network? For example, to build on the same example of what Microsoft is doing. Let's say I'm a bank in Canada, and I want to verify just identity of a new customer, but I don't know. I don't want to build this system for people to acquire those KYC credentials. Actually, I can accept anything that is that fits certain criteria, and that means that this bank can actually can publish a record in that marketplace saying that we are paying $1 to any KYC provider who creates a KYC VC. And then as a customer, I just go to the marketplace and I choose the one that I like the most out of the list. And they can be part of the same network. So they can be all partners of Microsoft, or they can be completely independent companies that just have some kind of VC issuance capabilities, not necessarily connected. Because of the nature, because of the openness and interoperability of the protocol, this would work. So there's no need for direct interactions. And then those marketplaces, they can also be decentralized. They can also have a reputation system within them. So you can have 100 different KYC providers, but as a bank, you can say that I'm only trusting the top 50 because there's been a lot of issuance and verification, and there's no problem with that data. And as a result of that, we probably will actually see the cost of KYC credential going down, because today we have companies like Onfido who are huge, and they can almost like monopolists. They can set up prices for issuance, even though it costs them nothing. So first time they do KYC, they need to verify, but the second time it's actually almost free for them, and they still charge. But as the competition increases and it becomes more efficient market, that would actually drive the cost of issuance down. So that's one example.
Yeah, that's where in your verifiable credential marketplace idea, it comes back to governance, and you mentioned governance earlier being kind of one of the areas that requires maybe a little more innovation and a little more thinking and investment to allow these types of things to happen. And I do agree with you on kind of the KYC or ID proofing. It's just logical that kind of this thing becomes more and more commoditized, and the price just keeps going down for this thing. Although it would be nice to be in that space today and raise $300 million on a crazy valuation, but it'll be interesting to see how they kind of adapt as things are changing here. And well, from my perspective, a lot of the use cases are just compliance driven today. And when you talk about the COVID credentials or the basic ID credentials, you mentioned KYC, it's all compliance driven. The interesting thing then afterwards, it's like, once you've been able to solve a compliance problem, now how do I extend that? And how do I start tying this original identity credential to further transactions and create traceability in the value chain? And I think that's an area that there was a lot of innovation or a lot of trials and errors that was happening with blockchain, but that's where I think like the property of traceability is one that's just like, for me, SSI just that's the solution to that property.
Yeah, and I think the reason it is starting with compliance, because we need to change the perception of what is verifiable credentials. Today, it's for most people, it's like blockchain. It's some kind of technology which no one understands how it works, but you need to invest in this. So from like average corporate, not IT corporation standpoint, it's something that we need to do, but we don't understand. Like as a bank, it probably will somehow solve our business problems, but we're not sure. Really, what we want to achieve is to and the problem is the verifiable credentials are addressing the notion of trust, and trust is such a basic concept that it's and it existed for millennia. So when the first document that was signed by the king, or some official document, that was the first trust transmission systems. So you had those people on horses who were distributing different orders from monarchs, and it's hard to change. So today, most people believe that you can trust information either if it's a nice looking paper, it has a stamp and a wet signature, or if it's coming from, official email address. And the notion of cryptographic signature is a little bit complicated. So if we start with compliance use cases, and if this is accepted by someone big like government or immigration authorities or banks, that would change this perception, and I think what we want to achieve as an industry is this equality between just a legally valid document and verifiable credential. It may be not 100% correct, but that's a good starting point. After that, the main positive property that verifiable credentials have, and also other decentralized technologies like DeFi or NFT or blockchains have, is that you can stack those one on top of another. So if someone develops a DeFi protocol like Uniswap, because it's open source, someone else can go and develop a like a Yarn finance, which kind of helps you to be more efficient in providing liquidity. And then someone can build something on top of that, which I don't know, makes it easier to work with a specific asset. So for verifiable credentials, the same, because it's intrinsically interoperable. Once you have those KYC documents, then you can have a scoring of different KYC providers, and you can have different zero knowledge or partial disclosure system that allows you to, I don't know, buy alcohol without revealing your name. So the stacking property of decentralized technology is what ultimately long-term will be differentiator from centralized KYC or just trusted data records system.
Stepan, I think we could go all day on a subject like that too, and it would be something interesting to discuss in some forum. I want to thank you for doing this today. I think it was quite a deep and very interesting conversation, and I really appreciate you sharing kind of your thinking and your opinion on the space and on all of this stuff. My last question is, when is this Clubhouse session happening? Let's do something.
Yeah, great question. Actually, I think we need to have some kind of active discussions happening outside of conferences. So there's an IAW coming up, so that would be a great community event. But I'm really interested in organizing or at least attending Clubhouse event on SSI. And actually, moving forward, it can actually be even split between, because SSI is actually quite big area. There's more nuanced areas that can deserve discussion and sharing of expertise.
Yeah, I look forward to making that happening. We'll try to move that forward. Thanks once again for doing this. This was phenomenal. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. To stay up to speed with future episode releases, please subscribe to the podcast on whatever channel you're listening to it right now. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me directly. You can find me online. I'm quite active on LinkedIn and Twitter, so I look forward to hearing from you. See you all next time.